Join us by the fireside for our evening stories of true life's strange encounters with mysterious visitors from worlds and other realities deep within our own universe and beyond. Strange sensation. I happen to believe that aliens were trying to abduct me when I had this experience, or at least came close to, the presence of one. It happened one night after school, and it was around 10:30. I was driving home with a friend on the freeway, and all of a sudden, my vision just kind of started getting very blurry, and everything just seemed far away. I also felt like my speech was affected and like I couldn't talk properly. It was like something was closing my jaw shut, and my chest just felt really tight. I was scared that I was maybe having a stroke or something. So I was trying to list off the names of everything around me to just try and keep myself calm. After about 7 minutes of this, my friend said, "It's awkward with the silence." And I told him how everything was blurry. And he replied, "Me too." I asked him if he felt like he couldn't speak too, because it's very unusual for us to be quiet. And he said, "My chest feels tight." And this freaked me out completely. And for the rest of the car ride, we were just able to talk, and we just spoke about this feeling over and over, and we both agreed it seemed like a kind of pressure and some kind of metallic thing. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the only way I can describe it. So anyway, I dropped him off, and we talked on the phone until I was home. We were both really on edge. On my ride home, I noticed that 3 streetlights shut out over me. This was the start of what could be just, an over-exaggeration or something. But, at the same time, I also, on that same night, saw a single blue light floating in the sky. I took my phone out to get a picture, and as soon as I opened the camera, the light switched to red and it wouldn't show up. When I put my phone away, it went back to blue, almost like whatever was in there didn't want a picture taken. The following night, I was parked in front of my house and I was texting when I heard this kind of ooh kind of noise, like the sound of this wooden stick going down those, ridged wooden tubes. And then I saw this kind of white creature that was like this big mass kind of thing, and it went behind my car. I was so terrified that, I went and I called a friend to come over so I wouldn't have to walk alone. That same night, I got a text from my friend who was in the car with me the first night saying that there was a knock on his front door, but when he went to answer, no one was there. Again, I'm sure the following days were just, maybe we were just being paranoid or something, but I still think that that original night of how we both felt the exact same symptoms and fear at the same time, now that was something that I will never forget. And that's not the kind of thing that just happens. Well, that certainly sounds like something that could either be alien or perhaps even paranormal. It's hard to say, really, because sometimes the two seem to sort of blend into each other, so you can't really tell the difference. But certainly, that experience of both of you having that sensation, that sort of physical reaction at the same time, that's definitely not, not a coincidence. There's something there, something going on. The big ship. So this is actually my family's story because they're the ones who witnessed this. This happened in the mid 80s, and I wasn't even born yet, but I have heard this story from every member of my immediate family. This means that it is either an elaborate and well orchestrated prank pulled by my entire family for the last 20 plus years, or they saw something. A little background on my family is necessary. My parents are pretty old and they're very religious. Not the type of people who are really into extraterrestrials or pranks per se. We're talking mashed potatoes, suburbia folk. So to me, it lends a little more credibility to their story because they don't really have the motive to make something like this up. Anyway, the story was that it happened in on a summer's day in the mid 80s, and my entire family, mom, brother, dad, sister, had just returned home from some event or other. I don't remember what. I think it was some kind of family reunion or something. It was early evening, and my brother and sister were out just riding their bikes in the driveway and on the allotment. Now, supposedly, while they were riding their bikes, they saw this big ship in the sky to the south heading north, and it kind of freaked them out, and they ran to get my parents. According to both my parents, this spaceship kind of thing slowly approached the house, and it was enormous. It was a kind of triangular shape, and it had windows all along the bottom of the aircraft that you could see into. The weird part, according to my dad, was that the ship appeared to be metal, not a blimp. But it did not make any sound, which was really strange because of the huge size of the ship. Needless to say, after they had stared at it for, a few minutes, they all just kind of freaked out and they hid in the basement. Nothing really happened after that. I don't know what this ship was, and neither does my family, and we don't know what it was there for. Could have been extraterrestrial, or it could have been some type of, classified military ship. So, there's no way for us to know. But, it certainly was really weird that this thing was so massive and it was like nothing we had ever seen before. And it just made absolutely no sound. It was like, as if it wasn't even there, which was really strange. From what I've heard, sometimes these things are seen, but they're actually, they're silent, they're not heard because they are not fully in this dimension. They're kind of, it's almost like they're in a, what's the word? It's like looking through a window. You can see them, but they're somewhere else at the same time, like, behind a window or something of into another dimension. And it makes me wonder how, what their experience of seeing us would be as well. And, it's just really, really strange, isn't it? But I'm sure that this must have been really terrifying for the family. A chaotic encounter. I'm generally a very fact-driven kind of person, but I have this story and I can't explain it. It just aggravates me in a way because I don't know how to explain it. And I used to live in Wisconsin, and this was on Rice Lake. And this was in my youth, and I was about 12 years old at the time. I was living with my mom, dad, older and younger brother on this large property with a house set back from our road. And it was on about 5 acres of, well kept lawn. And it had a backyard of 2 acres. Pretty well open area at the time. We had this radio station across the road, which was, a smaller building with a larger tower in a field. And we basically lived in farm country area. And one neighbor was living near us on the west side of our house, and through this solid tree line that was the start of a pine forest on our property. And the other two sides of the property had abrupt starts to wheat fields. One night, my mom, older brother, and I were watching TV, and suddenly the power just went out. We went outside to the front to see if the neighbor's was out as well, and he had a huge barn light that we could see through the woods. Nope, it was out. As we sat there, we heard yelling from the radio station. "I can't get the generator to start, Ted. Can you call Chris and get him to come up here ASAP?" Again, farm country, so no real ambient sounds beyond crickets. Then, within 5 minutes, a car drove just past our driveway and it just turned off. Like, it was driving and then the power just went out and it rolled to the side of the road. My older brother walked the long 5 acres down the driveway, and Mom and I watched from the porch. He came back and said that the car just lost power. He couldn't even get it to crank. Just then, this large blue orb, and I'd say it was about 1,000 square feet or so, shot across from one corner to the other of our rectangular well-cut property, from behind our house to across the road, no further up than 4 to 6 stories above our house. We just stood there, and we were going, "What the hell?" Across the road, we heard the guys at the radio station screaming, "What the hell was that?" My mom ran in to call the police and wake up my dad and little brother as me and my brother sat there on the porch. "Sons, come here now. I can't wake your dad up." We ran into our bedroom, which was the closest room to the west side tree line and had this huge glass door wall, 8-foot tall glass door basically. And in the bed was my dad and 5-year-old brother. I shook them hard and they wouldn't wake up. They were breathing fine, they were a little bit sweaty, but they were just sleeping so deeply they just wouldn't wake up. At this point, we just freaked out and we noticed the phones were dead too. We ran outside again, we started yelling across the yard to the radio station, and we were asking if they had a working phone. They replied no and asked if things were okay with us. Not wanting to, tell a story, my brother said, "Yes, everything's okay except for all the weird crap." Just then, on the west side above the tree line directly, 2 orbs pretty far up just started dancing in the sky. They were zigzagging around in ways that I have never seen anything move before. It was as if 2 puppies were playing in a pattern or something. One would go left, the other would chase, and then right, then up, then down, do a big circle, then the other. My brother and I just sat and watched, freaking out. "What is going on, dude?" Was said about 40 times in the 5 minutes that these orbs moved about above us. Then they dropped down to a lower altitude. We saw that the orb was a light on a larger object, but couldn't make out what it was really. But it went from the north side of the tree line to the south at half speed, really low and slow, and then it swooped up into the sky in this large, progressively faster arch into the sky. And then it was gone. My mother, who was watching from inside her room through those large glass doors, mentioned that she had been freaking out seeing all this and her husband and kids not waking up, and that it was just too much for her to handle, and she just started crying. All of a sudden, the power just goes on again. My mom screamed as it startled her. We ran inside to see, and she was calming down. She was splashing water on her face in the master bathroom attached to the bedroom. We went out through the glass door to check the sky, and we saw the car that was cocked out near the end of our driveway start up and take off fast. The neighbor's barn light was on too, and we saw the lights on the radio tower lit up. At that moment, my dad woke up and said, Why are you all in here?" It startled us, really, and Mom explained it all, and him and younger brother just laughed it off. "I was just sleeping. You must have not tried very hard to wake us." "We did," we said. So the next day, Mom buys a rifle, a telescope, and a bunch of alien books. LOL. She always said the gun was just in case. She would never bring it out unless she felt she had to. I think Dad not waking up, like that, really shook her to the core. So fast forward to about a week later. After so many calls to the police, the radio station, neighbors, they finally got someone to listen at the police station and take a report. And they all met in our front yard near the road as I watched from the porch, pretty far away, trying to make out what they were saying. Anyway, 3 days after that, two men came to the house who claimed to work for a surveying company, and it just so happened to be taking aerial surveys of the area, and they wanted to see if we wanted some pictures of our house. We had a rather nice house and a well-kept landscape, and they said they visited our neighbors prior that day and heard a crazy story. My older brother swears, and I mean swears, that the men had guns on them, large handguns under the backs of their shirts. Again, not super weird in the area, people do carry guns, but this just didn't seem like it was appropriate for these guys who were surveyors or whatever to be carrying guns like that. This was just kind of a red flag, and it was really weird. So anyway, my brother has seen these guns as these men walked in the front door, and he was behind them. And he was asking them, why they were there, why their van was there, and they were taking pictures. So anyway, they just kind of abruptly left after that. And as they left, we got the license of their car. And we called the officer who took our report, and we called the neighbor to compare stories. A month later, the officer called back just to tell us the plates belonged to a federal agency. I know this sounds dumb and maybe made up. If I didn't live through it, I wouldn't have believed it. Now, my brother and I have been blown off so many times about this story that we just stopped telling it anymore. It's like we just nod to each other whenever someone brings up UFOs or weird stuff. Besides my wife, I haven't told this story for at least a decade. But anyway, I know, and my brother knows, my family know what they experienced, so it doesn't matter in a way whether people believe us or not. Sometimes I guess you just have to experience things in order to really believe. Wow, that sounds like quite a dramatic experience with a UFO, and definitely sounds like you were being well and truly watched and observed after that. A black mass in the sky. This is my dad's story, actually, and he's told it to me a few times while I was growing up. And um, when my dad was 18 or so, and this was back in 1979 or 78, he was riding home from Wednesday night church with his dad, his sister, and his brother. They were in their black Buick, and it was, driving home along an empty stretch of highway. My dad was leaning his head against the glass and watching the stars, and he says it was a perfectly clear night, and he could see the huge expanse of sky just kind of stretched to the horizon. Now, we live in rural country, and even now, in 2016, at night, I can see stars unaffected by light pollution. His vision of the stars back then was suddenly hindered by this black mass that, just appeared. And it was so large that he figured it probably spanned half the county. Now, His father stopped the car in the middle of the highway, and all four passengers got out to stare up at this huge, flat, black expanse, the bottom of some sort of craft, by the looks of it. It was gigantic and silent. Dad says that there were these little lights that shone here and there, as if through windows, but it remained unmoving for a moment, as did his family as they stared in shock at this massive object. It was so big that he couldn't identify its dimensions. It just looked flat. He could not even estimate its distance for the size of the thing. Suddenly, a rectangular hatch or a door of some kind lowered, allowing this dazzling bright light to escape from within the craft, and Dad could see that at least where the door was, this part of the craft was curved, like the bottom of a saucer. A much smaller aircraft, like some kind of weird plane or a strangely shaped rocket, slowly exited the hatch door, which raised up and then closed once the craft was free of the doorway. This looming black mass remained still for a moment, and then, as suddenly and silently as it arrived, it flew away and up into the night sky impossibly fast. The smaller craft it left behind, and it too hesitated, perfectly still in the night sky, before it also shot away laterally towards the horizon. Now, my dad and his family were so shocked that they couldn't move or say anything for several minutes. Finally, Grandfather said, "Come on, y'all, dinner's waiting," and they piled back into the Buick. My dad said that dinner was quiet. None of them spoke before going to bed. The next day, they didn't speak about it, but by Christmas, a few months later, they treated it like a joke, a novelty story to entertain the extended family. But my dad has never forgotten the experience. Now, my dad is unfailingly honest. He doesn't like tall tales. He has no interest in unsolved mysteries or unexplained events. He dislikes sci-fi, other than the original Star Trek series. He's just a simple country man who keeps to himself. He has no other story like this one, so I believe him 100% that he witnessed this event and that he is not exaggerating anything. I live in the same area that he did back then, and while he lives about 30 miles away, I drive along that same highway and I pass the same Baptist church that he says he passed just before the craft appeared. And I look up into the sky each time and try to imagine what it must have been like to see something so big looming overhead. I've heard a number of theories that UFO sightings and run-ins with extraterrestrials can run in families, and I always have this small hope that one night, while driving home, I will also pass that church and have my own experience. So far, nothing's happened, but I keep hoping. Well, we certainly have to wonder why they would come in such a huge spaceship, if not to perhaps try to colonize the Earth. I don't know. Why else would they be here in something so big? Fascinating and very dramatic experience. Wow, that's definitely the kind of thing you never forget.